I stood at the entrance of the Seattle Real Estate Association Gala, my Cartier watch, the last remnant of my former life, gleaming under the crystal chandeliers while a portfolio of carefully orchestrated plans sat heavy in my designer briefcase. The same briefcase that had once carried divorce papers now held the blueprint of my revenge. Documents proving my ability to buy every single property my ex-husband had ever dreamed of owning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me as I remembered how Daniel had left me with nothing but debt and broken promises just 15 months ago. The opulent ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel buzzed with the quiet murmur of Seattle's elite real estate investors, their wealthy whispers echoing off marble columns and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city skyline. Golden autumn light streamed through the glass, catching the rim of my untouched champagne flute, a prop I'd been holding for the past hour while studying the room with calculated precision. I adjusted the sleeve of my black Burberry blazer, a recent investment in my new persona, and felt the weight of dozens of curious glances. To them, I was a mystery, the unknown woman who had appeared on their radar 6 months ago, methodically, acquiring properties across the city's most prestigious neighborhoods. But to the man who had just walked through the door, I was supposed to be nothing more than a distant memory, a cautionary tale of financial ruin. Daniel Thompson strode into the room with the same arrogant confidence that had once charmed me into marriage. His tall frame was wrapped in a custom-made suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. The silver his temples had grown more pronounced since I'd last seen him, adding to the distinguished air he cultivated so carefully. Behind him trailed his new girlfriend, Olivia, her red stilettos clicking against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to their impending downfall. The familiar ache in my chest had long since been replaced by cold, calculated resolve. I watched as they worked the room, Daniel's practiced smile never quite reaching his eyes as he greeted the city's real estate moguls, the same people who had once shunned me when the news of my bankruptcy had made the rounds in their circles. How quickly they had believed his carefully crafted story of my financial incompetence, never questioning how a successful investment manager could have been blindsided by her husband's elaborate scheme. I took a deliberate sip of champagne, allowing myself to savor the moment. The auction catalog in front of me listed 3 prime properties in Bellevue, all historically significant estates that Daniel had openly coveted for years. Properties that, until recently, had been far beyond his reach. But his latest venture had finally put him in a position to bid on them, or so he thought. The room continued to fill with potential buyers, their voices creating a symphony of power and privilege that I had once been part of. I recognized many faces: Andrew Cooper, the tech entrepreneur who had backed out of deals with Daniel twice; Jessica Taylor, the real estate developer who had been my closest friend until the scandal broke; and James Bennett, the investment banker, who had replaced me at the firm after Daniel's manipulations had destroyed my reputation. My fingers traced the edge of my phone where an email from my private investigator waited to be read. 6 months of meticulous planning had led to this moment. Every property acquisition, every strategic investment, every carefully planted rumor in the real estate circles had been orchestrated for today. The same methodical attention to detail that had once made me one of the city's top investment managers had been repurposed for something far more personal. A waiter passed by offering fresh glasses of champagne. I declined with a subtle shake of my head, remembering the last time I had attended an event in this very room. It had been my final public appearance before everything crumbled. The night, Daniel had introduced Olivia as his colleague, while our marriage was still intact. The night before, I discovered the elaborate web of financial deception he had woven, using my credentials, my reputation, and my trust. The memory no longer stung. Instead, it fueled the fire of satisfaction burning in my chest as I thought about the documents in my briefcase. papers proving my ownership of shell companies that had been systematically acquiring every property Daniel had shown interest in over the past year. Properties that would be revealed as part of the same holding company by the end of today's auction. The subtle shift in the room's energy signaled the approaching start of the auction. Daniel guided Olivia to a prime seat in the front row, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, the same protective gesture he had once used with me. I watched as he leaned down to whisper something in her ear, probably promising her one of the Bellevue estates as their future home, the same promise he had once made to me about other properties before he orchestrated my financial ruin and left me to face the creditors alone. I moved to my assigned seat, deliberately chosen to be in Daniel's line of sight, but just far enough away to maintain the illusion of coincidence. The auctioneer approached the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention as the room settled into anticipatory silence. I felt the weight of my past 15 months of careful planning converge into this single moment. The thick auction paddle felt solid in my hand, number 49, a deliberate choice because it was the number of properties Daniel had attempted to acquire before I began systematically outbidding him through my network of shell companies. Soon he would realize that every failed acquisition, every lost bid, every thwarted purchase had been orchestrated by the woman he had underestimated, the woman he had left bankrupt and alone, never suspecting she would rise from the ashes of his betrayal to become his most formidable opponent in the cutthroat world of luxury real estate. The auctioneer cleared his throat, and the last murmurs of conversation died away. I allowed myself a small smile as I opened my portfolio, ready for the performance of a lifetime. After today, Daniel Thompson would learn that some debts can't be cleared through bankruptcy, and revenge, like prime real estate, is all about location, location, location. The familiar dance of power and privilege unfolded before me as I observed Daniel working the room with practiced ease. Each handshake, each carefully timed laugh, each strategic touch of his hand on someone's shoulder was choreographed with the precision of a man who had built his empire on the art of manipulation. I watched him move through the crowd of Seattle's elite, remembering how I had once been mesmerized by that same calculated charm. Olivia floated in his wake, playing her role to perfection in a scarlet Valentino dress that probably cost more than what most people made in a month. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light with every gesture, a new addition to her collection that I recognized from the same jeweler who had once sized my engagement ring. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had always been predictable in his patterns, from his choice in jewelry to his selection of victims. From my strategically chosen position near the auction floor's eastern corner, I could observe without drawing attention. The old Rebecca would have been obvious in her surveillance, but 15 months of careful planning had taught me the power of invisibility. I watched as Andrew Cooper approached Daniel, their handshake lasting a fraction too long, a detail that confirmed my private investigator's report about their recent private dealings. Despite the outward display of cordial business relationships, I knew the truth about the cracks beneath the surface of Daniel's carefully constructed facade. James Bennett, my former colleague, hovered at the edges of their conversation, his eager expression betraying his desperate need for Daniel's approval. The same expression I had seen in board meetings before Daniel had orchestrated my downfall. James had stepped into my position at the firm with suspicious convenience, never questioning how a woman with my track record could have suddenly committed such devastating financial miscalculations. Now, watching him laugh too loudly at Daniel's jokes, I could see the insecurity that made him such an easy pawn in our world of high-stakes real estate. The weight of my Mont Blanc pen felt reassuring as I made subtle notes in my portfolio, documenting each interaction, each whispered conversation. 15 months ago, I had learned the hard way that in this world, everything had to be documented. Every seemingly insignificant detail could become crucial ammunition. The same attention to detail that had once made me one of the top investment managers in the city now served a different purpose. calculating not just financial returns, but the precise moment of maximum impact. Jessica Taylor's entrance caused a subtle shift in the room's energy. Her reputation as a ruthless property developer preceded her, and even Daniel's confident smile flickered slightly as she approached his group. I remembered countless dinner parties at her Queen Anne mansion where she had once called me her closest friend, the same friend who had turned her back when the scandal broke, accepting Daniel's version of events without question. Now, watching her air kiss Olivia's cheeks, I could see the calculation behind her warmth. Jessica had always been skilled at aligning herself with power. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The memory of my last conversation with Jessica surfaced unbidden. It had been 3 days after the news of my supposed financial misconduct had broken. "I'm sorry," she had said, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone delivering a well-rehearsed line. "But I have to protect my reputation in this market." The same reputation she had built partly through the deals I had helped her secure during our friendship. The betrayal had stung then, but now it served as another reminder of why every step of my plan had to be flawless. A young server approached my corner, offering fresh champagne. I declined with a subtle gesture, noting how his eyes lingered curiously on my face. No doubt he had been working here long enough to recognize the regular players in our world of luxury real estate, trying to place where he had seen me before. But the woman he was trying to remember, the one who had once commanded attention at these events, no longer existed. In her place sat someone far more dangerous, a woman who had learned to turn invisibility into power. Daniel's voice carried across the room as he launched into one of his favorite stories, the one about his first major property acquisition in Capitol Hill. I had heard it countless times during our marriage, watching him embellish different details depending on his audience. Now I caught the subtle inconsistencies in his telling, the carefully crafted lies designed to position him as the brilliant strategist who had seen potential where others saw risk. The truth, which only I knew, was far less flattering. That deal, like so many others, had been secured through carefully concealed manipulation and financial sleight of hand. Olivia laughed at all the right moments, her hand resting possessively on Daniel's arm. She wore the same expression I had once worn, a mix of adoration and pride that I now recognized as the look of someone who hadn't yet realized they were just another piece in his elaborate game. I wondered if she knew about the irregularities in his recent property acquisitions, or if, like me, she would only discover the truth when it was too late. The room had grown more crowded as the auction start time approached, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and barely concealed ambition. I observed as more familiar faces arrived. Robert Johnson, the bank manager who had signed off on the documents that had sealed my financial ruin. Michael Reynolds, the lawyer who had handled our divorce, and Emma Wilson, my former assistant who had maintained contact with me in secret, becoming an invaluable ally in my plan for redemption. Each of them had played their part in my downfall, whether knowingly or as unwitting pawns in Daniel's scheme. Now, watching them cluster in their usual social groups, I could see the invisible lines of power and influence that connected them all. The same connections I had spent the last 15 months mapping and manipulating, positioning myself through shell companies and proxy buyers to disrupt their carefully maintained order. A subtle vibration from my phone drew my attention. A message from my private investigator confirmed that everything was in place for the next phase of our plan. I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the symmetry of it all, how the same attention to detail that Daniel had used to orchestrate my bankruptcy would now be the instrument of his undoing. Every property he had lost to mysterious buyers over the past year, every deal that had inexplicably fallen through, had been carefully orchestrated to lead to this moment. The auctioneer's assistant began distributing the final registration papers, her heels clicking efficiently across the marble floor. I watched as Daniel received his documents, his confidence evident in the casual way he glanced over the details of the properties he thought would soon be his. The same confidence that had blinded him to the subtle signs of my re-emergence in the market, preventing him from connecting the dots between his recent string of failed acquisitions and the woman he had underestimated. As the room settled into pre-auction anticipation, I felt the weight of my portfolio, filled with evidence of shell companies, proxy buyers, and carefully timed acquisitions, press against my leg. Every document inside represented a strand in the web I had woven around Daniel's empire, each piece positioned to trigger a cascade of revelations that would expose not just his past manipulations, but the fundamental weakness in his carefully constructed world. His inability to imagine that the woman he had destroyed could rise again, smarter and more dangerous than before. The auction began with the subtle tap of the auctioneer's gavel, its sound rippling through the Fairmont Olympic ballroom like a pebble disturbing still water. I felt my pulse quicken as Jeffrey Hammond, the renowned auctioneer known for handling Seattle's most prestigious property sales, cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The moment I had orchestrated for 15 months was finally beginning to unfold. Ladies and gentlemen, Hammond's cultured voice carried across the hushed room, welcome to today's exclusive real estate auction. We begin with lot number 1, 2847 Bellevue Avenue East, a historic Bellevue mansion featuring 7 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, and unobstructed views of Lake Washington. His words were accompanied by stunning photographs appearing on the massive screens behind him, showcasing the property that I knew Daniel coveted most. I watched as Daniel leaned forward in his seat, his body language betraying his intense interest, despite his carefully maintained expression of casual indifference. Olivia's hand rested on his arm, her red lacquered nails digging slightly into his sleeve, a gesture of either support or possession. I couldn't quite tell from my position. I could see the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the same smile I had once mistaken for genuine warmth, but now recognized as his tell for anticipated victory. We'll start the bidding at $8 million, Hammond announced, his gavel poised. Do I hear $8 million? Daniel's paddle rose immediately, a confident gesture that drew knowing looks from those around him. His declaration of intent was met with murmurs of appreciation from the crowd. After all, this was exactly the type of bold move they expected from him. What they didn't know was that every aspect of this moment had been carefully choreographed down to the exact property that would open the auction. $8 million from Mr. Thompson, Hammond acknowledged. Do I hear 8.5? A paddle rose from the back of the room, one of my proxy buyers, right on cue. 8.5 million from number 63. I watched as Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was the first deviation from his carefully laid plans, but certainly not the last. His paddle rose again without hesitation. 9 million. The next few minutes unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. The price climbed steadily as my proxy buyers executed their carefully orchestrated dance, pushing the bidding higher with each raise. Daniel's initially confident posture began to show subtle signs of strain. His shoulder muscles tensed beneath his bespoke suit, and the hand holding his paddle tightened until his knuckles whitened. At 14 million, well above the property's expected selling price, Daniel shot a questioning look at James Bennett, who gave him a slight nod. I knew from my intelligence that 14 million was precisely at the limit of what Daniel's latest financing could support. He had arranged the loans carefully, leveraging his existing properties and his firm's resources to ensure he could secure this mansion. What he didn't know was that I had already acquired controlling interests in 2 of the banks providing his financing. 15 million, called out another of my proxy buyers, causing a ripple of surprised whispers to spread through the crowd. The bid was astronomical even by Bellevue standards. Daniel's pause was notable this time. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes as he weighed his options. His reputation demanded he continue bidding, but his financial constraints were beginning to bind. Olivia whispered something in his ear, her expression urgent. After a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, his paddle rose again. 15.5 million. The next bid came instantly. 17 million. The room fell silent. Even Hammond seemed momentarily taken aback by the aggressive jump. Daniel's face remained composed, but I could see the slight tremor in his hand as he lowered his paddle. He turned to confer quietly with James Bennett, their heads bent together in urgent discussion. From my angle, I could see the sheen of sweat beginning to form on Bennett's forehead. 17 million for the first time. Hammond's voice cut through the tension. 17 million for the second time. Daniel's paddle stayed down. The gavel fell with a decisive crack. Sold to bidder number 63 for $17 million. The loss of the first property was just the beginning. As the auction proceeded to the second lot, another mansion Daniel had openly expressed interest in, the pattern repeated itself. My proxy buyers emerged at crucial moments, pushing the prices beyond his carefully arranged financing limits. With each lost bid, I watched the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the increasingly frequent loosening of his tie, the way his fingers drummed anxiously against his thigh, the growing tension in his jaw. By the time the third property slipped through, his grasp, the whispers in the room had grown more pronounced. The invincible Daniel Thompson was failing to secure any of his targeted properties. And in the ruthless world of luxury real estate, such a public display of weakness was blood in the water. I observed as Jessica Taylor leaned over to whisper something to Andrew Cooper, both of them shooting speculative glances in Daniel's direction. The same people who had once abandoned me to protect their reputations were now beginning to question his. The irony was exquisite. The pivotal moment, the one I had planned for months, came during the auction of the fourth property. As Hammond announced the starting bid, my phone lit up with a text message, right on schedule. An associate of mine, who worked at one of Seattle's top financial newspapers, had published an article questioning the stability of Daniel's recent real estate ventures. Within minutes, phones around the room began buzzing as the story spread through the city's elite social networks. I watched as Daniel reached for his own phone, his face draining of color as he read the notification. His eyes darted around the room, no doubt noting the way people were now openly staring at their screens, and then at him. Olivia's perfectly maintained composure cracked slightly as she read over his shoulder, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of distress. The article detailed a pattern of suspicious financial activities surrounding recent property acquisitions attempted by Daniel's company. It didn't explicitly accuse him of wrongdoing, but the implications were clear to anyone who understood the industry. More importantly, it hinted at upcoming revelations about the true ownership of several key properties he had failed to acquire over the past year. The whispers in the room grew louder, and I could see the exact moment Daniel realized his carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. His eyes scanned the room frantically, no doubt searching for allies among the faces that had once smiled so readily at him. But in our world, allegiance followed power, and the first cracks in his facade were already showing. James Bennett had begun to edge away from Daniel's side, his survival instincts apparently overriding his loyalty. Jessica Taylor was already engaged in intense conversation with her lawyer, no doubt trying to distance herself from any potential fallout. The same people who had once turned their backs on me were now beginning to turn away from him. It was then, in that moment of growing chaos, that Daniel's eyes finally found mine across the room. I held his gaze steadily, allowing myself a small smile, the kind he had once given me when he thought he had won. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by disbelief, and then, most satisfyingly, fear. After 15 months of careful planning, watching him finally understand that his downfall had been orchestrated by the woman he had underestimated was better than any revenge I could have imagined. The auctioneer's voice continued in the background, but the room's attention had shifted. The carefully maintained veneer of civilized business had cracked, revealing the brutal reality of power and consequence that lay beneath. As Daniel's world began to crumble in real time, I remained perfectly still in my seat, a silent witness to the destruction I had orchestrated. The disruption I had planned was complete, but this was only the beginning of his fall from grace. As chaos erupted in the auction room, my mind drifted back to the precise moment, exactly 1 year ago, when my transformation from victim to victor had begun. I remembered standing in the rain outside a small cafe in Vancouver's Gastown district, my hand trembling slightly as I read an email that would change everything. The message was from Martin Lee, my former client from my investment management days, and contained just 4 words. "I believe in you still." Those words had been my lifeline, arriving exactly when I had hit rock bottom. I had fled to Vancouver after the bankruptcy, using the last of my savings and the only asset Daniel hadn't managed to touch, a small inheritance from my grandmother that he hadn't known about. While he assumed I was broken and hiding in shame, I was actually laying the groundwork for the most elaborate property acquisition strategy Seattle had ever seen. Martin hadn't just offered belief, he had offered resources. As one of Asia's most successful real estate moguls, he remembered how I had helped him navigate the complex waters of American property investment years ago. More importantly, he had never believed the stories of my supposed financial incompetence. "A woman who quadrupled my portfolio in 2 years doesn't make amateur mistakes," he had said during our first meeting in his gleaming office overlooking Vancouver Harbor. That meeting had lasted 6 hours, during which I had laid out my suspicions about Daniel's methods and my plan for exposing them. Martin had listened intently, asking occasional sharp questions that helped refine my strategy. By the end of the night, he had not only agreed to become my silent partner, but had also introduced me to his network of discreet international investors, who operated through complex networks of shell companies. The next 3 months had been intense, spent between Vancouver, Portland, and San Francisco, building a web of financial entities so intricate that even the best forensic accountants would struggle to connect them to me. Each company was legitimate, each transaction meticulously documented, but the ownership structures were deliberately obscured through multiple layers of international corporations. I had learned from Daniel's methods, but unlike him, I ensured everything I did was technically legal, just extraordinarily complex. My first move had been to acquire a small property management firm in Delaware, which then purchased a controlling interest in a Singapore-based investment company, which in turn owned shares in multiple real estate holding companies across 3 continents. This labyrinthine structure allowed me to begin acquiring properties without raising suspicions. Each purchase was made through a different subsidiary, each transaction handled by different law firms, each deal structured uniquely to avoid revealing any patterns. I remembered the first property I had taken from Daniel's grasp, a boutique hotel in Capitol Hill that he had been negotiating to purchase for months. Through my network of sources, I had learned exactly how much he was planning to offer and had swooped in 24 hours before his scheduled closing with an all-cash offer that the sellers couldn't refuse. The property had gone to one of my shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and operating through a Swiss bank account. The look on his face when that deal had fallen through had been my first taste of satisfaction, though he had no idea. I was behind it. That success had emboldened me, and over the next several months, I had systematically targeted every property he showed interest in. Each acquisition was carefully timed to appear random, each purchase made through a different entity, each transaction designed to slowly drain his resources as he was forced to repeatedly engage in bidding wars he couldn't win. Martin's training had been invaluable during this period. He had taught me the art of patience in property warfare, showing me how to use time and market psychology as weapons. "Real estate isn't just about buildings," he had said. "It's about understanding human nature. The strongest position is the one your opponent doesn't know you hold." Following his advice, I had hired a team of private investigators to track Daniel's every move in the real estate market. Every lunch meeting, every property viewing, every casual expression of interest in a building was noted and analyzed. I built a comprehensive map of his intended acquisitions, always staying 2 steps ahead of his plans. The most satisfying part had been watching him gradually deplete his financial resources trying to secure properties that kept slipping through his fingers. Each failed acquisition forced him to take on more debt, leverage more assets, make riskier financial moves. I knew his patterns. He would never back down from a property he wanted. His ego wouldn't allow it. It was this predictability that I had used against him, leading him into a carefully laid trap of his own making. My team of financial analysts, all hired through separate consulting firms to maintain discretion, had tracked every loan, every leverage point, every financial manipulation he employed. I watched as he gradually used up his credit lines, stretched his resources thin, and began taking increasingly desperate measures to maintain his appearance of success. The true masterstroke had been acquiring controlling interests in 2 of the regional banks he relied on for financing. This had been done through a series of minority shareholding purchases by different offshore companies, each seeming unrelated but all ultimately controlled by my primary holding company. It had taken 6 months and nearly half of my available capital, but it gave me the power to monitor his financial movements from the inside and, when the time was right, begin subtly restricting his access to credit. As these memories flowed through my mind, I watched Daniel across the auction room, knowing that he was just beginning to understand the extent of his predicament. The properties he had lost today were just the visible part of the iceberg. Within the next 24 hours, he would discover that most of the properties he had failed to acquire over the past year were actually controlled by a single entity, my primary holding company, soon to be revealed as one of the largest property owners in Seattle. The dossier in my briefcase contained proof of every transaction, every shell company, every strategic move I had made. More importantly, it contained evidence of how I had used entirely legal means to accomplish what he had done through fraud and manipulation. Every document was ready to be released to the press, showing how a woman he had underestimated had outmaneuvered him at his own game. My phone buzzed quietly. Another message from Martin. All final transfers complete. Checkmate. I allowed myself a small smile, knowing that at this exact moment, the ownership of several key properties was being transferred to my primary holding company, consolidating my position as one of the city's most significant property owners. The timing was precise, designed to coincide with the moment Daniel would be most vulnerable. Looking around the room at the whispered conversations and concerned glances, I knew that Seattle's real estate elite were about to discover that the woman they had shunned 15 months ago had risen from the ashes of bankruptcy to become their most powerful colleague. Every person who had turned their back on me would soon realize they had backed the wrong player in this high-stakes game. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice served through the very system Daniel had tried to use against me. While he had relied on fraud and manipulation, I had built my resurrection on meticulous planning and legitimate business strategies. His fall would come not from broken laws, but from being outmaneuvered by the woman he had thought too weak to fight back. The auction room had transformed into a battlefield of whispers and hastily made phone calls. The growing realization of Daniel's successive failures rippled through the crowd like shockwaves after an earthquake. But I remained perfectly still in my seat, a calm eye in the center of the storm I had created. Each ping of a notification on the gathered phones, each hurried conversation, each worried glance was another piece of my victory falling perfectly into place. I watched as Daniel's carefully constructed world began to fracture around him. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the article broke. No doubt his lawyers, investors, and partners all demanding explanations. Olivia had excused herself 10 minutes ago, her stilettos clicking a hurried retreat toward the ladies' room. but not before I caught the look of barely concealed panic in her eyes. The same look I had worn 15 months ago when my own world had imploded. James Bennett was now openly avoiding Daniel's attempts to catch his eye, suddenly deeply engaged in a conversation with two real estate developers near the bar. I could read the calculation in his stance, the same survival instinct that had led him to distance himself from me during my downfall was now prompting him to abandon Daniel. In our world, loyalty lasted only as long as power did. Jessica Taylor had positioned herself strategically near the exit, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in urgent whispers. Even from across the room, I could read her lips forming the words damage control and distance ourselves. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had used the same phrases when cutting ties with me, always the first to abandon a sinking ship. A subtle movement caught my eye as Andrew Cooper slipped out of the ballroom, no doubt heading to his office to reassess his recent deals with Daniel. I knew from my intelligence that they had 3 major development projects in the pipeline, all of which would now be scrutinized in light of today's events. The house of cards was falling exactly as I had planned, each reaction triggering another in a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction. My phone vibrated with a message from Emma. Second phase initiated. All documents being released to major financial publications in next 30 minutes. I allowed myself a small sip of water, feeling the cool liquid contrast with the warm satisfaction spreading through my chest. The article that had shaken the room was just the opening salvo. The real bombshells were yet to come. Daniel was now standing near the podium, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with his primary lawyer, Michael Reynolds. I could see the tension in Daniel's shoulders, the way his left hand kept adjusting his tie. A nervous tick. I remembered from our marriage, one that only appeared when he felt truly threatened. Reynolds' usually composed face showed signs of strain as he scrolled through something on his tablet, likely reviewing the mounting evidence of their precarious position. The auctioneer had called for a brief intermission, a standard practice, between major lot offerings, but the timing couldn't have been more perfect for my purposes. It gave the news time to spread, allowed the whispers to grow louder, and most importantly, gave everyone in the room time to process the implications of what they were witnessing. I felt a presence beside me and turned to find Isabella Torres, the hotel magnate, sliding gracefully into the empty seat next to mine. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the keen interest in her dark eyes. "Quite an interesting morning," she murmured, her accent adding a musical quality to the understatement. I merely nodded, maintaining my composure. Isabella had been one of the few who had privately expressed doubts about Daniel's version of my downfall, though she had remained publicly neutral. "One might wonder," she continued softly, "if there is more to this story than meets the eye." Her gaze was penetrating, and I knew she was putting the pieces together faster than most. Isabella hadn't built her international hotel empire by being slow to recognize shifts in power. I met her gaze steadily, allowing a hint of a smile to play at the corners of my mouth. "The real estate market is full of surprises," I replied, my voice carrying just enough weight to confirm her suspicions without saying anything explicit. Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw the moment of recognition, the realization that she was sitting next to the architect of Daniel's downfall. Across the room, I noticed Robert Johnson, the banking executive who had signed off on my financial ruin, hurriedly gathering his things. His face had lost its usual ruddy color, replaced by a sickly pallor that suggested he understood the implications of what was unfolding. He had rubber-stamped Daniel's manipulated documents without proper due diligence, and now that decision was coming back to haunt him. A fresh wave of murmurs swept through the room as more phones lit up with notifications. The second wave of revelations was beginning right on schedule. I watched as people's expressions changed while reading the new information, the detailed exposé of how a mysterious holding company had systematically acquired prime Seattle properties over the past year. All properties that Daniel had publicly expressed interest in. The article didn't name me directly, but it laid out a pattern that would be impossible to ignore for anyone familiar with the players involved. More importantly, it raised questions about the financial stability of Daniel's recent ventures, hinting at the over-leveraged positions and desperate maneuvers he had employed in his failed attempts to secure properties. Olivia had returned to Daniel's side, but her body language had shifted subtly. She stood slightly apart from him now, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her phone like a lifeline. I recognized the look in her eyes, the same one I had worn when I first began to suspect that my husband wasn't the man I thought he was. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and I knew from experience they would grow rapidly in the fertile soil of suspicion. A movement near the entrance caught my attention as Marcus Blackwood, Daniel's tennis partner and confidant, entered the room. His face was grave as he made his way directly to Daniel, ignoring the attempts of others to catch his attention. The die message he delivered caused Daniel's face to drain of what little color remained. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, served through the very system Daniel had tried to use against me. While he had relied on fraud and manipulation, I had built my resurrection on meticulous planning and legitimate business strategies. His fall would come not from broken laws, but from being outmaneuvered by the woman he had thought too weak to fight back. I could feel the weight of the moment settling around me, the culmination of 15 months of careful planning crystallizing into this perfect instance of revelation. The room continued to buzz with speculation and concern, but I remained still, allowing the chaos to swirl around me while maintaining my position of calculated observation. Each reaction, each hurried exit, each whispered conversation was another note in the symphony of Daniel's downfall, a composition I had orchestrated with painstaking precision. The next wave of revelations would be even more devastating, timed to coincide with the resumption of the auction. As I watched Daniel's world crumble piece by piece, I felt not just the satisfaction of revenge, but the deep, resonant pleasure of knowing that I had beaten him at his own game, using the very tools and methods he had thought himself master of. The intermission was drawing to a close, and Jeffrey Hammond was making his way back to the podium. The room had shifted from its earlier atmosphere of refined competition to one charged with tension and uncertainty. The moment had come for my final move, the one that would transform me from a silent observer to the undisputed power player in Seattle's real estate world. I rose from my seat with deliberate grace, feeling the weight of my Burberry blazer against my shoulders like armor. The portfolio in my hand contained documents that would shatter the last remnants of Daniel's carefully constructed facade. Each step I took toward the podium echoed against the marble floor, drawing attention from the scattered group still engaged in urgent whispered conversations. "Mr. Hammond," I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "I believe it's time for an important announcement regarding today's proceedings." The auctioneer paused, his experience with high-stakes auctions evident in the way he quickly assessed the situation and gave me a professional nod. Daniel's head snapped up at the sound of my voice, his eyes widening with a mixture of recognition and dawning horror. The room fell silent as I made my way to the front, the click of my heels against marble the only sound in the suddenly still air. Olivia's hand froze halfway to her mouth, her perfectly applied lipstick slightly smudged from nervous biting. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and confident, "I think it's time we bring some clarity to today's events." I opened my portfolio and removed a sleek tablet, activating it to project onto the screens behind the podium. My name, as some of you may remember, is Rebecca Mitchell Thompson, though I've recently returned to my maiden name, Rebecca Mitchell. The whispers started immediately, but I continued, my voice cutting through them with practiced authority. Over the past year, through my holding company Mitchell Global Ventures, I have acquired controlling interests in several significant properties in the Seattle metropolitan area. With a swipe of my finger, a map appeared on the screens showing dozens of properties highlighted in red, every single one a building Daniel had tried to purchase. These acquisitions, all conducted through legitimate and fully documented transactions, represent a total investment of over $1, $2 billion in prime Seattle real estate. Another swipe brought up a complex chart of corporate structures. Each property was acquired through various subsidiary companies, all ultimately controlled by Mitchell Global Ventures. I could see Daniel's lawyer, Reynolds, frantically typing on his phone, no doubt trying to verify the information I was presenting. Jessica Taylor had moved closer, her earlier attempt to distance herself forgotten in the face of this dramatic revelation. James Bennett had gone pale, likely realizing that his quick abandonment of me 15 months ago had been a catastrophic miscalculation. Today's auction has made it clear that certain parties, I allowed my gaze to rest briefly on Daniel, have been operating under the misconception that they could continue their pattern of aggressive acquisition without consequence. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. That ends today. With another tap on my tablet, new information filled the screens. Detailed financial records showing how Daniel's recent property ventures had been built on increasingly shaky financial foundations. As the new controlling shareholder in both Pacific Northwest Trust and Emerald City Financial, I feel it's my duty to inform this gathering that all outstanding loans and credit lines will be undergoing immediate review for compliance. The impact was immediate. Daniel lurched to his feet, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You can't," he began, but I cut him off smoothly. "I can, and I have," I stated, my voice carrying an edge of steel. Every transaction, every shell company, every property acquisition has been meticulously documented and verified by 3 independent audit firms. I gestured to my tablet, where the logos of prestigious accounting firms now appeared. Unlike some, I believe in maintaining impeccable records. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Phones were frantically accessed, whispered conversations grew more urgent, and I could see various power players in the room rapidly reassessing their allegiances. Olivia had physically distanced herself from Daniel. Her earlier show of unity completely evaporated. Furthermore, I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos, I'm announcing the formation of the Mitchell Real Estate Trust, which will be acquiring additional properties throughout the Seattle area. I allowed myself a small smile. We're particularly interested in properties that have been, let's say, mismanaged by their current ownership. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. I was not just revealing my power, I was declaring war on Daniel's entire real estate empire. The screens behind me now showed a series of properties currently owned by his company, each one flagged with potential irregularities in their financing. For those interested in discussing potential partnerships or property transitions, I added, pulling a business card from my portfolio and holding it up, my office will be accepting meetings starting tomorrow morning. I suspect some of you may find it beneficial to secure appointments sooner rather than later. The reaction was immediate. Several people reached for their phones, no doubt instructing their assistants to book appointments. Isabella Torres caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod of approval. She recognized a power play when she saw one. Mr. Hammond, I turned to the auctioneer, who had been watching the proceedings with professional composure. I believe we can now resume the auction, though I suspect some bidders may wish to reassess their positions given this new information. As I stepped away from the podium, I felt the shift in the room's energy. The whispers had taken on a different tone, no longer shocked or scandalized, but calculating and eager. In our world, power was everything, and I had just demonstrated that I now held more of it than anyone else in the room. I walked back to my seat, my path now cleared by people eager to make eye contact and offer subtle nods of acknowledgement. The same people who had shunned me 15 months ago were now desperately trying to position themselves as potential allies. Daniel remained standing, his face a mask of barely contained fury and desperation. His eyes followed me across the room, and I could see him struggling to process how completely I had outmaneuvered him. The man who had once dismissed me as financially naive was now watching his empire crumble under the weight of my strategic brilliance. As I settled back into my seat, I felt the satisfying weight of the moment. This wasn't just revenge. It was a complete reversal of power, executed with the same precision and attention to detail that had once made me one of the city's top investment managers. I had not just reclaimed my position, I had transcended it, becoming something far more powerful than Daniel had ever imagined I could be. The auction room had transformed into a theater of shifting allegiances, with every glance, movement, and whispered conversation carrying the weight of calculated repositioning. As I sat in my carefully chosen seat, I watched the aftermath of my announcement ripple through Seattle's real estate elite, like waves on a disturbed pond, each circle of impact more revealing than the last. Daniel remained rooted to his spot, his usual commanding presence diminished by the shock of my revelation. His phone buzzed incessantly, no doubt calls from partners, investors, and creditors, all demanding immediate explanations. I observed as he checked the screen, his face growing increasingly ashen with each notification. The man who had once wielded his phone like a scepter, destroying careers and fortunes with a single call, now stared at it as if it were a live grenade. Olivia's transformation was perhaps the most telling. The woman who had smugly taken my place, both in Daniel's life and in our social circles, now stood slightly apart from him, her body language screaming disconnection. She was already crafting her exit strategy. I could see it in the way she clutched her designer handbag, in how her eyes darted between the room's power players, assessing potential lifelines. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was already planning her escape from the same trap that had once ensnared me. James Bennett's reaction particularly caught my attention. My former colleague had positioned himself strategically near the bar, his tie slightly loosened, a telling detail for a man who prided himself on impeccable presentation. He was speaking rapidly into his phone, his free hand gesturing in the agitated manner I remembered from our days closing difficult deals. Through my network of sources, I knew exactly who he was calling. His contact at Goldman Sachs, desperately trying to salvage his reputation before the fallout destroyed his carefully cultivated career prospects. Jessica Taylor proved true to her nature, demonstrating why she had survived multiple market crashes and industry upheavals. Within minutes of my announcement, she had orchestrated a subtle but clear separation from Daniel's inner circle, positioning herself closer to my side of the room. Her networking skills were legendary, and I watched with quiet amusement as she worked the crowd, her whispered conversations no doubt rewriting history to minimize her previous alliance with Daniel. The transformation of Andrew Cooper was equally fascinating. The tech billionaire who had backed several of Daniel's recent ventures now stood near the emergency exit, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely concealed panic. His fingers flew over his phone's keyboard, likely instructing his team of lawyers to find any possible way to disentangle his investments from Daniel's crumbling empire. I knew from my research that their partnerships went deep, each questionable, deal now a potential liability. Isabella Torres, ever the shrewd businesswoman, had already begun making her move. She caught my eye across the room and raised her glass in a subtle salute, her expression conveying both congratulations and an offer of future alliance. Of all the people in the room, she alone had maintained her composure, recognizing my revelation, not as a catastrophe but as an opportunity for strategic realignment. The auction staff huddled near the podium, uncertainty clear in their body language. Jeffrey Hammond, despite his years of experience handling high-stakes auctions, seemed unsure whether to proceed with the remaining lots. The upcoming properties now carried different implications, each one a potential piece in the larger game of power and influence that I had just redefined. Robert Johnson, the banking executive, had turned an interesting shade of gray. His position at Pacific Northwest Trust would be among the first casualties of my takeover. The due diligence reports I had ordered were already being processed, each one designed to expose the corners he had cut and the oversights he had committed in service to Daniel's schemes. His career, built on quiet compliance with powerful men's demands, was about to become a cautionary tale in regulatory circles. Marcus Blackwood, Daniel's longtime confidant, demonstrated remarkable survival instincts. He had already edged away from his former friend and was engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with his lawyer. The tennis games and private club meetings that had cemented their friendship now seemed like relics of a bygone era, replaced by the harsh reality of potential legal exposure. The younger real estate developers in the room, those who had once looked up to Daniel as a mentor and model of success, now huddled in small groups, their expressions a mixture of shock and calculation. They were witnessing not just the fall of a powerful man, but the reshaping of the very power structure they had hoped to climb. The lessons they took from this day would likely influence their careers for years to come. I noticed Michael Reynolds, Daniel's lawyer, methodically packing his briefcase, his movements precise and controlled despite the chaos around him. As one of Seattle's top real estate attorneys, he understood better than most the implications of what had just unfolded. The slight tremor in his hands as he sorted through his documents suggested he was already preparing for the inevitable legal battles ahead. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see several people who had slipped out to the hotel's courtyard, engaged in urgent phone calls, their gestures and expressions telling a story of damage control and rapid repositioning. News of my takeover would be rippling through Seattle's business community, causing tremors in boardrooms and executive suites across the city. Even the hotel staff had picked up on the shift in power dynamics. The servers who had been circulating, with drinks and canapes, now oriented their movements toward my section of the room, unconsciously acknowledging the new center of gravity in the space. It was a subtle detail, but one that spoke volumes about how quickly power structures adjust to new realities. Olivia made a show of checking her watch, her movements deliberately casual but betraying an underlying urgency. I recognized the look in her eyes, the same one I had worn when I first began to understand the true nature of Daniel's character. She was calculating her options, weighing the costs of loyalty against the benefits of self-preservation. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, so similar to the one Daniel had given me during our marriage, caught the light as she moved, a glittering reminder of how history repeats itself. The room had become a living tableau of cause and effect, each person's reaction triggering responses in others, creating a complex web of shifting relationships and allegiances. The carefully maintained facade of civilized business had cracked, revealing the raw dynamics of power and survival that had always lurked beneath the surface of our polished world. The remainder of the auction proceeded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction, each lot another nail in the coffin of Daniel's empire. As the final gavel fell, I gathered my belongings with deliberate precision, every movement a statement of controlled power. The time had come for the physical demonstration of my victory. A series of carefully planned moves that would cement my transformation from victim to victor in the eyes of Seattle's real estate elite. I stood, smoothing my blazer with the same attention to detail that had characterized my 15-month journey of revenge. My briefcase, a recent acquisition that replaced the one Daniel had given me during our marriage, felt solid in my hand, weighted with documents that would reshape the city's real estate landscape. The room's attention followed my movement as I made my way toward the exit, my path deliberately taking me past Daniel's position. He still stood there, his earlier confidence shattered, looking somehow diminished in his bespoke suit. As I approached, he made a move as if to speak, but I cut him off with a single raised hand, the same dismissive gesture he had once used on me during board meetings. "Your office will be hearing from Mitchell Global Ventures' legal team within the hour," I stated, my voice carrying just far enough to reach the nearest clusters of interested observers. "I suggest you clear your schedule for the next few days." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The student had become the master, the victim, now the victor. I continued past him without waiting for a response. The click of my heels, against marble, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of my triumphant heart. Olivia had already disappeared, no doubt making calls to secure her own position in the aftermath of today's events. Outside the Fairmont Olympic, my driver held the door of a sleek black Maybach, a car chosen specifically because it was the model Daniel had always coveted but never quite managed to acquire. As I settled into the leather interior, I pulled out my phone and initiated the next phase of my plan. "Start the sequence," I instructed my chief of operations, knowing that across the city, teams of lawyers and executives were now moving to secure my victory. The car glided through Seattle's streets, passing buildings that now belonged to my empire. Each property we passed told a story of careful planning and strategic acquisition. We turned onto 4th Avenue, where the headquarters of Pacific Northwest Trust stood as a testament to my most ambitious move, the takeover of one of Daniel's primary lenders. The building's glass facade reflected the late afternoon sun, its windows witnessing the shift in power that was now sending shockwaves through the city's financial district. "Take me to the Emerald Tower," I instructed my driver. The luxury high-rise had been Daniel's pride and joy, the penthouse his symbol of success. But now, through a series of complex financial maneuvers, the building's management company was under my control. As we pulled up to the entrance, I saw the security team snap to attention. They had already been briefed about the change in ownership. The private elevator rode smoothly to the top floor, where Daniel's personal office occupied prime real estate with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. I stepped into the space that had once been his sanctuary, noting the expensive artwork and custom furniture that would soon be replaced. My team was already there, led by Emma Wilson, my newly appointed head of operations. "Everything is proceeding according to schedule," Emma reported, handing me a tablet displaying real-time updates of our takeover operations. "The banking review teams are in place, and we've already initiated audits of all suspicious transactions. Legal has filed the preliminary paperwork for the property transfers, and PR is managing the narrative with key media outlets." I moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the view that Daniel had once used to intimidate visitors and business partners. The city spread out below, a maze of opportunities and power plays that I now controlled. My reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed. No longer the naive investment manager who had trusted her husband, but a force to be reckoned with in her own right. "Start the renovations immediately," I instructed, turning back to Emma. "I want every trace of the previous management erased by the end of the week. The new board will need appropriate accommodations for our first meeting." The symbolism of claiming his personal space, of transforming it into the headquarters of my own empire, was a message that would resonate throughout Seattle's business community. My phone buzzed with updates from various team members, law firms confirming the filing of multiple suits against Daniel's companies, banks initiating reviews of his accounts, and property management firms transferring control to my organizations. Each notification was another strand in the web I had woven, another step in the complete dismantling of his world. The sun was setting over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the surrounding buildings. I watched as lights began to flicker on across the city, each one a potential piece in my expanding empire. The weight of the moment settled around me. This was more than just revenge, it was a complete restructuring of power in Seattle's real estate world. Emma approached with another tablet, this one displaying live feeds from security cameras in the building's lobby. I watched as Daniel's personal items were being removed from his private elevator entrance, his dedicated parking space already reassigned, his security access revoked. The physical erasure of his presence was happening in real time, each removal a symbolic step in claiming this space as my own. "The contractors are ready to begin the renovations," Emma reported. "We've already selected new artwork, furniture, and design elements that align with Mitchell Global Ventures' aesthetic." The plans she pulled up showed a complete transformation of the space. Gone would be the dark woods and masculine energy that Daniel had favored. replaced by a modern, sophisticated design that reflected my vision for the future. I moved to his former desk, an oversized monstrosity of rare wood and brass fixtures, and ran my finger along its surface. "Have this donated to the Historical Society," I instructed, along with the rest of his furniture. "Everything here needs to be replaced." The symbolism of donating his prized possessions to a museum was not subtle. His era was now officially history. The elevator dinged, and my security team entered with the building's former head of operations. He looked nervous, his tie slightly askew as he carried a box containing master keys, security codes, and access cards. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, but I corrected him immediately. "Ms. Mitchell," I stated firmly. "And yes, I'll need everything. Transferred immediately. My team will handle the security protocols from here." The man nodded quickly, understanding that his position, like everything else in this building, was now under review. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I stood in what was now my office, feeling the weight of my victory settle around me. The physical taking of this space, this symbol of power in Seattle's real estate world, was the clearest message I could send to everyone who had once doubted me. Each change, each renovation, each removal of Daniel's influence was another step in establishing my new reality. I picked up my phone one final time for the day, dialing a number I had long memorized but never used, Daniel's private line. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. "The locks have been changed," I said simply before ending the call. In our world of property and power, some messages needed no elaboration. The week following my takeover unfolded like a masterfully choreographed performance, each day bringing new developments that further cemented my position as Seattle's most powerful real estate figure. I had moved my base of operations to the penthouse office in the Emerald Tower, now transformed into a command center from which I orchestrated the systematic dismantling of Daniel's remaining influence. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across my new desk. A sleek, modern piece crafted from glass and steel that perfectly embodied the transparency I was bringing to an industry long plagued by backroom deals and hidden agendas. Before me lay the morning's reports, detailed analyses of property acquisitions, bank records, and market positions that painted a picture of my growing empire. Emma entered with her usual efficiency, tablet in hand and ready for our morning briefing. "The audit teams have completed their preliminary review of Pacific Northwest Trust's loan portfolio," she began, pulling up detailed spreadsheets. "They've identified 27 instances of questionable lending practices, all connected to Daniel's various ventures. The numbers told a story of systematic manipulation, one that would now serve as evidence in the multiple investigations being launched." I sipped my morning espresso, served in a delicate cup from the same collection that Olivia had once bragged about at charity functions. "How are the property transitions progressing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. In our world, asking was often more about sending a message than seeking information. "Smoothly," Emma replied. "We've completed the management change in 12 of the major properties. The remaining 5 will be transitioned by the end of the week." She paused, a slight smile playing at her lips. "The Emerald City Hotel Group has already reached out about potential partnership opportunities. Apparently, they're eager to distance themselves from their previous agreements with Daniel." The mention of the Emerald City Group brought a particular satisfaction. They had been one of the first to shun me during my supposed downfall. Now, they were practically begging for a meeting. I made a mental note to let them wait another week before having my office respond. My phone buzzed with a message from Martin, in Vancouver. The time difference meant he was already ahead of us, dealing with the Asian market's reaction to my power play. "Our partners in Singapore are quite impressed," his message read. "They're interested in expanding our collaboration to include properties in the Asian market." Another door opening, another opportunity arising from the ashes of my previous life. The intercom buzzed, and my assistant's voice came through. "Ms. Mitchell, Jessica Taylor is here for her 9 o'clock. Right on time." Jessica had been among the first to reach out after my revelation at the auction, eager to realign herself with the new power structure. I took a moment to adjust my position, ensuring the morning light fell just right, creating the imposing silhouette I had carefully cultivated. "Send her in," I instructed, noting how different this felt from our previous interactions when she had been the one wielding power and influence. Jessica entered with her usual grace, but I could see the nervous energy beneath her polished exterior. Her Prada handbag, last season's model, I noted, clutched slightly too tightly, her smile a touch too eager. "Rebecca," she began, using my first name as if we were still the close friends we'd once been. "Thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, its slightly lower height another subtle reminder of our new dynamic. "I assume you're here to discuss the Mercer Island development project," I stated rather than asked. The project had been one of her prime investments, one that Daniel had helped finance through now questionable means. "Yes, well," she shifted slightly in her seat. "I was hoping we could discuss a potential restructuring of the ownership arrangement. Given the recent changes," she trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. I opened a folder on my tablet, displaying detailed analysis of the project's financing. "Our audit shows some interesting patterns in the initial funding," I noted, watching her composure flicker slightly. "Perhaps we should start there." The meeting continued for exactly 30 minutes, during which I laid out my terms for allowing her to maintain a stake in the project. Each condition was a carefully crafted reminder of our new positions. Her role would be minimal, her profits capped, and her decisions subject to my approval. The woman who had once dismissed me from her social circle was now practically grateful for the chance to be a minor player in my world. As Jessica left, visibly relieved to have salvaged something from the wreckage of her alliance with Daniel, Emma returned with updates from our legal team. "The regulatory agencies have officially launched their investigation into Daniel's banking practices," she reported. "They're particularly interested in the documentation we provided regarding the Medina property deals." I moved to the window, looking out over the city that was rapidly becoming my domain. Below, construction crews were already at work on one of my newest acquisitions, a prime piece of real estate that Daniel had tried to secure for years. The sound of their machinery drifted up, a symphony of progress and change. "What's the status of the Queen Anne conversion project?" I asked, though the detailed reports were already in my morning briefing. The project, converting a historic mansion into luxury condominiums, had been Daniel's dream for years. Now it would be completed under my direction, with every detail reflecting my vision rather than his. Emma pulled up the relevant files. "The architectural plans have been revised according to your specifications. The Historical Society has approved our modifications, and the contractors are ready to begin next week." She paused, then added, "The penthouse unit that Olivia had been designing for herself has been completely reimagined. The new plans incorporate your suggestions for a community wellness center instead." The irony of transforming what would have been Olivia's dream home into a public space was not lost on either of us. In our world, such gestures carried weight far beyond their practical implications. My phone buzzed again, this time with news from our banking division. The review of Daniel's accounts had uncovered exactly what I had expected, a pattern of leveraged positions and risky investments that would now be his undoing. Each discovery was another thread pulled from the tapestry of his former life, another piece of evidence that would ensure his fall from grace was permanent. "Schedule the board meeting for tomorrow," I instructed Emma. "It's time to implement phase 2 of our expansion plan." The meeting would bring together the heads of all my newly acquired properties and companies, many of them former allies of Daniel who had quickly pledged their loyalty to the new power structure I represented. As the day progressed, I received Regular updates from various teams, property management transitions proceeding smoothly, banking reviews uncovering more evidence of questionable practices, legal preparations advancing for multiple civil suits. Each report was another brick in the foundation of my new empire, built not on the quicksand of manipulation and fraud, but on the solid ground of strategic thinking and legitimate business practices. 1 month after the auction that had changed everything. I stood in my private office as the sun set over Seattle Bay, casting a golden glow across the city I now effectively controlled. The woman reflected in the floor-to-ceiling windows barely resembled the one who had fled in shame 15 months ago. The physical similarities were there, the same height, the same features, but everything else had transformed. My phone buzzed with another update from the financial teams handling the dismantling of Daniel's empire. Each notification represented another piece of his world crumbling, another asset being redistributed, another partner abandoning ship. But these updates no longer brought the sharp satisfaction they once had. Something deeper had taken root in place of that need for revenge. A profound understanding of my own power that transcended any desire to simply destroy what he had built. Emma entered with the evening briefing, her presence a reminder of how far I'd come from the days when I worked alone, driven by nothing but the need for vengeance. The last of the property transfers has been completed, she reported, setting a leather portfolio on my desk. Mitchell Global Ventures now officially controls 62% of premium real estate in the downtown district. I nodded, remembering a time when such news would have filled me with vindictive pleasure. Now it felt more like confirmation of something I already knew, that I had not just survived Daniel's betrayal, but had transcended it entirely. "What's the status of the Community Development Initiative?" I asked, turning my attention to the project that had increasingly occupied my thoughts. Emma pulled up the relevant documents on her tablet. The conversion of the Bellevue property into affordable housing units is proceeding ahead of schedule. The local council was particularly impressed with the inclusion of the educational center and job training facilities. This project, transforming what would have been another luxury development into something that could actually benefit the community, represented everything I had learned about the true nature of power. It wasn't just about acquisition and control. It was about the ability to effect meaningful change. I moved to my desk, running my fingers along its smooth surface. The modern glass and steel construction had replaced Daniel's heavy wooden monstrosity, just as my transparent business practices had replaced his web of secret deals and hidden agendas. "Schedule a meeting with the educational consultants for next week," I instructed. "I want to be directly involved in developing the training programs." The irony wasn't lost on me that my quest for revenge had led me to discover a purpose far more meaningful than mere retribution. Each decision I now made carried the weight of responsibility to something larger than my own vindication. My phone lit up with a message from Martin. "Saw the announcement about the community development project. This is why I believed in you from the start." His words triggered memories of that rainy day in Vancouver, when he had offered not just financial backing but something far more valuable, belief in my capabilities when I had almost lost faith in myself. Olivia had reached out earlier in the week, her message a carefully worded attempt to position herself as an ally rather than an enemy. I had let the message sit unanswered, not out of spite, but because I recognized that she, like so many others, was still playing the old game of power and influence that I had moved beyond. The evening light painted shadows across the office as I reviewed the plans for my next major initiative. A comprehensive overhaul of how luxury real estate developments could incorporate community benefits without sacrificing profitability. It was the kind of project that would have seemed impossible in my previous life, when success was measured solely in dollars and square footage. "There's one more thing," Emma said, pulling up a final document. "Daniel's lawyer reached out about a potential settlement." She paused, gauging my reaction. They're offering to surrender control of the remaining properties in exchange for dropping the pending investigations. I felt a smile touch my lips, not of triumph, but of understanding. Send them our standard response about regulatory compliance and legal obligations, I replied. The woman I had been 15 months ago would have savored this moment of complete victory. Now I recognized it as simply another business decision, one that would be made based on what served the greater good, rather than personal satisfaction. Rising from my desk, I moved back to the windows, watching as lights began to twinkle on across the city, each one representing a story, a life, a potential for change. My reflection showed more than just a successful businesswoman. It showed someone who had learned that true power lies not in destroying others, but in building something meaningful from the ashes of destruction. The security team's evening report arrived, detailing the usual updates about building access and visitor logs. Buried in the middle was a note that Daniel had been seen leaving his last remaining office in the city, carrying boxes to his car. A year ago, this image would have filled me with vindictive joy. Now it barely registered as relevant to my path forward. Emma cleared her throat softly. The Educational Foundation Board is waiting for your final approval on the scholarship. Program parameters. This initiative, using profits from my real estate empire to fund education for underprivileged students, represented everything I had learned about the true meaning of success. I picked up the proposal, noting how my hands no longer shook with suppressed emotion when handling documents that would impact Daniel's world. Instead, they moved with the steady purpose of someone who understood that every decision carried weight beyond personal victory or defeat. Schedule a dinner with Isabella Torres next week, I instructed Emma. I want to discuss expanding the educational initiative to include her hotel properties. Isabella, unlike many others, had recognized early on that my transformation was about more than just revenge. Her recent proposals for collaboration focused on sustainable development and community impact rather than mere profit. As night fell over Seattle, I gathered my things, preparing to leave for the day. The office, once a symbol of my triumph over Daniel, had become something else entirely. A place where real change could be initiated, where power could be wielded not for personal gain, but for meaningful impact. My driver waited with the car, ready to take me not to the luxury penthouse Daniel had once coveted, but to my modest yet elegant apartment in Fremont. I had chosen it not for its prestige, but for its proximity to the community I was working to improve. The woman who had once measured success in square footage and designer labels had evolved into someone who understood that true power lies in the ability to affect positive change. The city lights blurred past the car windows as we drove, each streetlight illuminating a path far different from the one I had originally set out on. My journey had begun as a quest for revenge, but it had led me to something far more valuable. And understanding of who I truly was and what I was capable of achieving. 6 months after the auction that had reshaped Seattle's real estate landscape, I stood at the podium of the newly renovated Mitchell Center for Community Development, formerly Daniel's prized Bellevue acquisition. The morning sun streamed through the vast windows, illuminating the faces of hundreds of attendees gathered for the center's inaugural ceremony. The symmetry of the moment wasn't lost on me. The very property that had once symbolized Daniel's greed had been transformed into a beacon of hope and opportunity for the community. The audience represented a striking cross-section of Seattle society: community leaders, business executives, education advocates, and residents from the surrounding neighborhoods. In the front row sat Martin, who had flown in from Vancouver specifically for this event, his presence a reminder of how far I'd come from that rainy day when he had first offered his support and belief in my potential. 2 years ago, I began, my address, my voice carrying clearly through the state-of-the-art auditorium. I learned a fundamental truth about power and purpose. The faces before me were attentive, many of them the same people who had witnessed my supposed downfall and subsequent rise. True success isn't measured by what we acquire, but by what we create. From my position on the stage, I could see Isabella Torres nodding appreciatively. Our partnership had evolved far beyond the initial business alliance, blossoming into a collaboration that was reshaping how luxury properties could serve both profit and purpose. The educational programs we had implemented across our combined properties were already showing promising results. Jessica Taylor sat several rows back, her expression a mixture of respect and lingering regret. She had recently approached me about investing in the Community Development Initiative, a move that showed she too was beginning to understand that the old ways of doing business needed to evolve. I had accepted her investment not out of forgiveness, but because every ally in this new mission mattered more than old grudges. Today, I continued, gesturing to the building around us, we're not just opening a community center. We're launching a new model for how real estate development can serve as a catalyst for positive change. The blueprints displayed on screens behind me showed not just this center, but 5 more planned developments across the city, each one designed to combine profitable business with meaningful community impact. Emma sat in the wings, tablet in hand, monitoring the live coverage of the event. The media narrative had shifted dramatically over the past 6 months, from sensational stories about real estate power plays to in-depth coverage of our innovative approach to urban development. The headline on the morning Seattle Times had read, "Mitchell Global Ventures, Redefining Success in Real Estate." As I outlined our plans for the future, the job training programs, the educational initiatives, the small business incubator, spaces, I caught sight of James Bennett slipping into the back of the auditorium. His presence was another sign of how thoroughly the industry had transformed. He had recently reached out about implementing similar community-focused programs in his own developments, finally understanding that the future of real estate lay not in exclusive luxury, but in inclusive prosperity. The true measure of success, I said near the conclusion of my speech, lies not in what we build for ourselves, but in what we create for others. The words echoed through the space, carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. I had learned this lesson through fire and transformation, through the journey from seeking revenge to finding purpose. The morning's news had carried the final notice of Daniel's bankruptcy filing. The information had crossed my desk without stirring any of the emotions it might have once provoked. His downfall was no longer the victory I savored. Instead, my satisfaction came from the knowledge that every property he had lost was being transformed into something that served a greater purpose. Olivia had relocated to Portland according to the society pages. Her departure from Seattle had been quiet, marked only by a brief note expressing her hope that some of our community development initiatives might be implemented in Oregon markets. I had passed her message to our regional development team, recognizing that good ideas could come from unexpected sources. After the ceremony, I hosted a small reception in the center's rooftop garden, a space that offered breathtaking views of the city I had grown to see in an entirely new light. Martin approached, raising his glass in a subtle toast. "You've created something remarkable," he observed, his eyes taking in the vibrant space around us. "Something far more valuable than mere revenge." He was right. The empire I had built extended far beyond physical properties and financial assets. It was an entirely new approach to real estate development, one that proved profit and purpose could coexist and even enhance each other. The quarterly reports showed our ventures were more successful than traditional luxury developments, attracting investors who recognized that sustainable, community-focused projects represented the future of urban development. Emma joined us, carrying the latest updates on our expanding initiatives. "The waiting list for the job training programs is growing," she reported, "and 3 more developers have reached out about implementing similar models in their properties." Each piece of news confirmed that we were creating not just buildings, but a movement. As the reception continued, I found myself drawn to the edge of the rooftop garden, looking out over the city that had witnessed my transformation. Seattle stretched before me, a landscape of possibilities rather than a battlefield of power plays. Each building, each neighborhood represented not just property value, but potential for positive change. My phone buzzed with a message from our development team. The permits for our next community center had been approved ahead of schedule. This one would be built in the heart of a neighborhood that desperately needed investment and opportunity. The project would include not just job training and educational facilities, but also affordable housing units and spaces for local businesses. The sun was setting over Puget Sound, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflected off the surrounding buildings. As I watched the city transition from day to night, I realized that my journey had come full circle. The woman who had once sought revenge had found something far more powerful: the ability to create lasting, meaningful change. The future stretched out before me, filled not with the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but with the endless possibilities of purpose-driven success. Each new project, each community impacted, each life changed, was another step forward on a path that led not to personal triumph, but to collective progress. In the end, I had not just reclaimed my power, I had redefined it entirely. 1 year to the day after the auction that had changed everything, I stood in my office at the top of the Emerald Tower, watching the first rays of dawn paint the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and promise. The woman reflected in the window was both familiar and strange, the same features but with an entirely different energy, transformed by the journey from victim to victor to visionary. The morning Seattle Business Journal lay on my desk, its headline capturing the extraordinary arc of my story, from bankruptcy to billions, how Rebecca Mitchell revolutionized Seattle real estate. But it wasn't the headline that caught my eye. It was the smaller article below announcing the launch of our 10th Community Development Center, this one in a neighborhood that Daniel had once dismissed as worthless. Emma entered with her usual, quiet efficiency, carrying the morning's reports. "The final numbers are in from the first quarter," she announced, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The community integrated development model has outperformed traditional luxury properties by 37%. She paused, allowing herself a small smile. "And Daniel's last remaining property was officially transferred to the bankruptcy trustees this morning." The news should have felt like the final victory in my long campaign of revenge, but instead, it barely registered as relevant. My attention was focused on the blueprints spread across my desk, plans for a revolutionary mixed-use development that would combine luxury units with affordable housing, educational facilities, and small business incubators. This was my legacy. Now, not the destruction of Daniel's empire. My phone buzzed with a message from Martin. "Investors in Vancouver and Toronto are asking about implementing your community development model across Canada." The international interest in our approach had grown exponentially, proving that profit and purpose could coexist and even enhance each other. What had begun as a quest for revenge had evolved into a global movement for responsible real estate development. Olivia had recently given an interview to a Portland business magazine, crediting her experience in Seattle with changing her perspective on property development. She was now working with community housing initiatives in Oregon, proving that transformation was possible for anyone willing to learn from their experiences. Jessica Taylor had become one of our strongest advocates, using her considerable influence to promote the integration of community benefits into luxury developments. Her recent projects all followed our model, proving that the old guard of real estate could adapt to new ways of thinking when shown a better path. The view from my office now represented something far different from what it had a year ago. Each building in the skyline was no longer just a property to be acquired, or a symbol of power. It was an opportunity to create positive change, to blend prosperity with purpose in ways that benefited everyone. Isabella Torres entered my office, right on time for our morning meeting. Our partnership had blossomed into something that went far beyond business alliance. We were pioneering a new approach to urban development that was being studied by universities and emulated by developers. Worldwide, the Educational Foundation Board approved the expansion, she announced, settling into one of the chairs designed for comfort rather than intimidation. We'll be able to double the number of scholarships next year. The foundation, funded by profits from our real estate ventures, had already helped hundreds of students access educational opportunities they would never have had otherwise. James Bennett had recently reached out about collaborating on future projects, his message carrying a hint of the humility he had learned through watching the industry transform around him. I had agreed to meet, not out of forgiveness, but because every ally in this mission to reshape real estate development mattered more than old grudges. The morning sun continued its journey across the sky, illuminating the city I had come to see in an entirely new light. Each street, each building, each neighborhood held potential not just for profit but for positive change. The woman who had once sought revenge had found something far more powerful: the ability to create lasting, meaningful impact. Emma returned with updates from our regional division. The Oregon partnerships are expanding faster than projected, she reported, and the Vancouver market is showing strong interest in our integrated development model. What had begun as a local victory had grown into a regional movement, proving that success could be measured in more than just dollars and square footage. My phone buzzed again, this time with news that the City Council had unanimously approved our latest development proposal. The project would transform a forgotten corner of the city into a vibrant community hub, complete with affordable housing, educational facilities, and spaces for local businesses to thrive. Looking out over the city I now helped shape, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me here. The bankruptcy that Daniel had orchestrated to destroy me had instead become the catalyst for my greatest triumph, not just in reclaiming my power, but in discovering an entirely new way to wield it. The woman who had walked into that auction room a year ago, armed with plans for revenge, had been transformed by her own victory. In seeking to destroy Daniel's empire, I had discovered something far more valuable: the ability to build something meaningful, something that would outlast any personal vendetta. The sun now sat high in the sky, its light reflecting off the buildings that stood as monuments not to personal power, but to the possibility of positive change. Each property in my portfolio told a story not of revenge accomplished, but of communities strengthened, opportunities created, and lives transformed. The final page of the morning's report contained a small note that would have once been the centerpiece of my day. Daniel had been seen leaving the city, heading for the airport with a single suitcase. But the news barely registered. I was too focused on the future to spare much thought for the past. As I prepared for my next meeting, this one with a group of regional developers interested in implementing our community-integrated model, I caught my reflection in the window once more. The woman looking back at me was neither victim nor victor, but something far more powerful. A visionary who had transformed personal tragedy into universal opportunity. The empire I had built stood not as a monument to revenge, but as proof that success could be measured in more than just personal triumph. Each building, each project, each initiative was a testament to the truth I had discovered along the way: that the greatest victory lies not in destroying what others have built, but in creating something that enriches everyone it touches. The sun reached its zenith, bathing the city in the full light of day, and I knew with absolute certainty that my journey had never really been about reclaiming what I had lost. It had been about discovering who I could become, and in that discovery, finding a purpose far greater than revenge could ever provide. The next chapter of my story began on a crisp autumn morning, 18 months after the auction that had started it all. I stood on the construction site of what would become the Mitchell-Torres Learning Center, our most ambitious project yet. The morning fog was just beginning to lift, revealing the steel skeleton of what would soon be a 12-story complex, combining luxury condominiums with educational facilities, affordable housing, and incubator spaces for local businesses. The construction crew was already at work, their movements precise and purposeful against the backdrop of cranes and scaffolding. I had made it a habit to visit each site regularly, not just to monitor progress, but to connect with the people, bringing our vision to life. This particular project held special significance. It stood on the exact spot where Daniel had once planned to build an exclusive members-only club, a monument to exclusivity that would have further divided the city's haves and have-nots. Now it would serve as the physical embodiment of everything I had come to believe about the true purpose of power and wealth. The architectural plans had been designed to foster community interaction with shared spaces where residents from the luxury units could mingle with students and entrepreneurs from the educational and business incubator sections. It was a radical departure from the segregated developments that had once defined luxury real estate in Seattle. Emma joined me on the site, tablet in hand as always. Her practical boots and hard hat a far cry from the corporate attire she wore in our office meetings. She had embraced the hands-on approach to our projects with the same efficiency she brought to everything. "The foundation work is ahead of schedule," she reported, gesturing toward the massive concrete base. "The structural engineers have confirmed we can add the additional classroom space on the 5th floor without compromising the design." I nodded, mentally rearranging the floor plan to accommodate the change. The demand for our educational programs had grown beyond all projections, a testament to the hunger for opportunity in communities long overlooked by traditional developers. "What about the solar array?" I asked, looking up at the section of the structure that would eventually support one of the largest private solar installations in the city. This particular feature had been a point of contention with some investors who questioned its cost-effectiveness, but I had insisted on it as part of our commitment to sustainability. "The revised estimates came in last night," Emma replied, pulling up the relevant documents. "With the new tax incentives, we're looking at a 7-year return on investment rather than 10. The engineering team has also found a way to increase capacity by 15% without additional structural modifications." This was the language that now dominated my days. Not the cutthroat maneuvering of high-stakes property deals, but the detailed planning of developments designed to strengthen communities while still providing the financial returns that ensured our work could continue and expand. We walked the perimeter of the site, stopping occasionally to speak with foremen and workers. Many of them were graduates of our job training programs, now earning living wages in careers they might never have accessed otherwise. I knew most of them by name, having made it a point to maintain the personal connections that reminded me why this work mattered. Carlos, a site supervisor who had completed our first construction management program, approached with updated blueprints. "We've resolved the issue with the Eastern Foundation, Ms. Mitchell," he reported, pointing to the relevant section of the plans. "The solution actually creates an opportunity for that additional green space you were interested in. This kind of problem-solving, turning challenges into opportunities for improvement, had become the hallmark of our projects. It reflected a fundamental shift in how I approached not just business, but life itself." As the tour concluded, I noticed a familiar figure waiting near the site entrance, Isabella Torres, elegant as always, even in the practical clothing required for a construction visit. Her presence was unexpected. Our weekly meeting wasn't scheduled until tomorrow. "I couldn't wait to share the news," she explained as I approached. Her smile suggested something significant. "The Seattle Business Leadership Council voted unanimously this morning. The Mitchell model is being adopted as the recommended framework for all new major developments in the city." The news took a moment to process. The Leadership Council, composed of the city's most influential business figures, had long been resistant to our integrated approach, viewing it as idealistic rather than practical. Their endorsement represented a fundamental shift in the city's development philosophy. "They're acknowledging what the numbers have been showing all along," Isabella continued. "Integrated developments with strong community components actually outperform traditional luxury properties in long-term value creation. Your quarterly reports made quite an impression. The vindication was sweet, not because it represented a personal triumph, but because it meant our approach would spread beyond our own projects, reshaping the city's development landscape in ways that would benefit countless people. We made our way to a temporary office at the edge of the site, where Emma had arranged for coffee and a more detailed discussion of the implications. The space was simple but functional, with large windows overlooking the construction activity, a constant reminder of the tangible impact of our work. "There's more," Isabella added once we were settled. "Robert Johnson called this morning." The mention of the banking executive who had once rubber-stamped Daniel's fraudulent dealings caught me by surprise. He had largely disappeared from Seattle's business circles after the collapse of Daniel's empire, his reputation tarnished by association. "He's been working with a consortium of regional banks," Isabella explained. "They're interested in creating a special funding track for developments that follow our integrated model. Apparently, their risk analysis shows our approach actually reduces default rates and increases property values in surrounding areas." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same financial systems that had once been manipulated to fuel Daniel's schemes of exclusivity and self-enrichment were now recognizing the value in developments designed to lift entire communities. Emma's tablet chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen, then looked up with an expression I had rarely seen: genuine surprise. "It's from Jessica Taylor," she said. "Her company just acquired that problematic site in South Lake Union, the one tied up in litigation for years. She wants to know if we'd consider a partnership to develop it using our model." The South Lake Union property had been a notorious eyesore and point of contention, a prime piece of real estate caught in a web of competing claims and legal battles. That Jessica had managed to secure it was impressive. That she wanted to develop it according to our principles rather than maximizing short-term profit was remarkable. "Tell her I'll meet with her next week," I decided after a moment's consideration. "Ask her to prepare a preliminary vision statement focusing on community integration." As Emma drafted the response, I moved to the window, watching the construction. Crews work in coordinated motion. Each person had a role, each task built upon others. The entire project moving forward through collective effort rather than individual brilliance. A physical manifestation of the philosophy that now guided my approach to business and life. My phone vibrated with an incoming call. Martin, calling from Vancouver. "I just heard about the Leadership Council's decision," he said when I answered, not bothering with preliminaries. His voice carried the warm satisfaction of a mentor whose student has exceeded all expectations. "You've changed the game, Rebecca. Not just for Seattle, but for the entire regional market." "We've changed it," I corrected gently, acknowledging the crucial role his early support had played. Without his belief and resources during those dark days after my bankruptcy, none of this would have been possible. "No," he insisted. "This was always in you. I just provided a little capital and a lot of encouragement. The vision was yours from the beginning, even when you thought it was about revenge." His words touched on a truth I had come to recognize over time. Even in my darkest moments, when vengeance seemed the only goal worth pursuing, some deeper part of me had been preparing for this transformation, gathering the knowledge, honing the skills, and building the relationships that would eventually serve a purpose far greater than retribution. After the call ended, I rejoined Isabella and Emma, who were deep in discussion about the implications of the Leadership Council's decision for our upcoming projects. Their animated conversation reflected the excitement of people who recognized they were part of something transformative. "We should rethink the Queen Anne development," Isabella was saying. "With the new framework, we might be able to increase the affordable housing component without compromising the financial returns." Emma nodded, already adjusting projections on her tablet. "The tax incentives alone would offset most of the reduced revenue from the luxury units. and the community integration score would qualify us for the preferential financing rates under the new guidelines. I listened to their exchange, appreciating how completely they had embraced the principles that now guided our work. What had begun as my personal vision had become a shared mission, attracting talented people who brought their own insights and enthusiasm to the effort. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, I cautioned, though I shared their excitement. The framework is a beginning, not an end. We'll still face resistance from developers who see community investment as an unwelcome obligation rather than an opportunity. Isabella smiled knowingly. Of course, but now they'll have to compete on our terms. The market is recognizing what you've been saying all along, that integrated development isn't just morally right, it's financially smart. She was right, of course. The quarterly performance reports for our properties consistently showed stronger returns and greater stability than comparable traditional developments. The integrated model reduced vacancy rates, decreased maintenance costs through resident engagement, and created positive spillover effects that enhanced property values throughout surrounding neighborhoods. What had begun as an idealistic experiment had proven itself as a superior business model, validating my belief that profit and purpose could not only coexist, but actually enhance each other when properly aligned. As our meeting concluded and we prepared to leave the construction site, I took a final moment to survey the work in progress. In 6 months, this skeleton of steel and concrete would become a living ecosystem of learning, working, and living spaces, each component supporting the others in a sustainable cycle of community development. Just as I turned to go, I noticed a small group of students gathered at the site perimeter, participants in our youth architecture program, brought here by their instructor to observe real-world construction techniques. Their expressions of wonder and curiosity as they studied the emerging structure reminded me of the ripple effects of our work, extending far beyond physical buildings to shape aspirations and possibilities. I made my way over to the group, introducing myself not as the CEO of Mitchell Global Ventures, but simply as Rebecca, one of many people working to create something meaningful in their community. Their questions were insightful and challenging, reflecting the fresh perspectives that continually revitalized our approach. One young woman, perhaps 16, asked a question that particularly struck me. How do you decide what to build when there are so many different needs in a community? It was the kind of fundamental inquiry that cut to the heart of our philosophy, and I found myself responding with an honesty that would have been impossible in my previous life of polished corporate presentations. We listen, I told her, and we recognize that no single project can address every need. So we build networks of developments, each with different emphases but all connected by shared principles of accessibility, sustainability, and opportunity. Most importantly, we design with flexibility, creating spaces that can evolve as community needs change. Her thoughtful nod suggested the answer had resonated, perhaps planting a seed that would grow into her own vision of community development in years to come. It was these interactions, far more than financial statements or press coverage, that confirmed the value of the path I had chosen. As I finally departed the site, driving through neighborhoods that had once been mere investment opportunities, but now represented communities with faces and stories I knew personally, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from that rainy day in Vancouver when Martin had first extended his hand in support. What had begun as a quest for personal vindication had evolved into something I could never have imagined during those dark days. A movement reshaping not just Seattle's physical landscape, but its understanding of what development could and should achieve. The woman who had once stood at an auction with revenge in her heart now drove through the city with a vision of transformation that extended far beyond herself. The locks I had changed were no longer on Daniel's properties, but on the very definition of success in real estate development. And in that transformation lay a victory far more complete and satisfying than any act of revenge could have provided. The discovery that the most powerful response to betrayal is not to destroy, but to create something better in its place. The evening found me in a quiet corner of Fremont's Waterway Cafe, a modest neighborhood establishment far removed from the luxury venues where Seattle's real estate deals had traditionally been negotiated. The rustic wooden tables and mismatched chairs created an atmosphere of unpretentious authenticity that perfectly suited the meeting I had arranged. Mark Davidson sat across from me, nervously turning his coffee cup between calloused hands. As Daniel's former chief project manager, he had been responsible for implementing many of the developments that had maximized profit at the expense of community needs. His fall from corporate grace had paralleled his employers, though with fewer headlines and less dramatic financial consequences. "I appreciate you meeting with me, Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the humility of someone who had been forced to reassess his life's work. "I didn't expect you'd be willing to." I studied him carefully, noting the changes 2 years had wrought. The designer suits and polished arrogance had been replaced by practical clothing and an air of cautious sincerity. "Your proposal was intriguing," I replied neutrally. His email had arrived unexpectedly last week, a detailed plan for repurposing abandoned industrial sites in Tacoma, using our community-integrated model, but with innovations specific to the challenges of environmental remediation. Mark nodded, pulling out a well-worn notebook filled with sketches and calculations. "I've spent the last 18 months studying environmental engineering," he explained. "After everything fell apart, I needed to understand what sustainable development actually meant, not just as a marketing term, but as a practical reality." His journey of professional redemption wasn't unique. Many of Seattle's development professionals had been forced to reinvent themselves in the wake of the industry's transformation. What distinguished Mark was the thoroughness of his approach and his willingness to start from the bottom rather than seeking to preserve his former status. "The Tacoma sites have been written off by traditional developers because of the cleanup costs," he continued, spreading out several detailed site analyses. "But if we integrate the remediation process with job training programs and phase the development to allow for immediate community use of portions of the sites, the economics become viable." I examined his projections, impressed by the practical creativity they displayed. This wasn't the work of someone trying to impress with grandiose visions, but of a professional who had developed a genuine understanding of the challenges and opportunities of sustainable development. "You've incorporated several elements of our model," I observed, "but there are substantial adaptations." He nodded, a hint of professional confidence returning to his demeanor. "Your approach provided the framework, but these sites have unique challenges. The contamination issues require specialized training programs, and the surrounding neighborhoods have different needs than the Seattle communities where your model evolved." We spent the next hour discussing the technical and financial aspects of his proposal. His understanding of both the engineering challenges and the community dynamics reflected not just academic study, but genuine engagement with the Tacoma neighborhoods affected by these industrial wastelands. As our conversation wound down, I found myself facing a decision I hadn't anticipated when I agreed to this meeting. Mark Davidson represented a direct link to the world Daniel had created: the ruthless prioritization of profit over community, well-being, the willingness to exploit regulatory loopholes, the cultivation of a corporate culture that valued appearance over substance. Yet the man sitting across from me had clearly undergone a genuine transformation, one driven not by opportunism, but by a hard-earned recognition of the flaws in his former approach. His proposal for Tacoma reflected precisely the kind of innovative adaptation our model needed to expand beyond Seattle's specific conditions. "Why come to me?" I asked finally, setting aside the technical documents to focus on the fundamental question. "There are other development firms who might be less skeptical of your intentions." Mark met my gaze directly for the first time. "Because you understand what it means to rebuild from nothing," he said simply. "And because you've proven that development can serve something greater than ego or wealth." His answer reflected an understanding of my journey that went beyond the business press accounts of my rise from bankruptcy to industry leadership. It acknowledged the deeper transformation that had turned a quest for revenge into a mission for community renewal. I considered for a moment longer, then made my decision. I'll have Emma contact you tomorrow to arrange a formal presentation to our development team. I can't promise approval, but your proposal deserves serious consideration. The relief and gratitude in his expression confirmed I had made the right choice. The Mitchell model wasn't just about buildings, but about creating opportunities for transformation, personal as well as physical, individual as well as communal. As Mark gathered his materials, he hesitated, clearly wanting to say something more but unsure of its reception. For what it's worth, he finally ventured, not everyone who worked for Daniel approved of what happened to you. Some of us just didn't have the courage to speak up. I acknowledged his words with a nod, neither accepting nor rejecting the implied apology. The past couldn't be undone, but it could be learned from, a principle that applied to people as much as to development practices. After Mark departed, I remained at the cafe, watching the evening flow of neighborhood residents, young professionals mixing with longtime locals, each contributing to the vibrant community life that had drawn me to Fremont. This was what successful urban development should nurture, not the sterile luxury enclaves Daniel had championed. My phone vibrated with a message from Emma. Torres Partnership Agreement finalized. Legal says we can announce the Vancouver expansion next week. The notification would once have triggered an immediate return to work, but I had learned the value of reflective moments away from the constant pressure of business operations. Instead, I ordered a fresh pot of tea, content to observe the community around me and consider the broader implications of the day's developments. Mark's proposal for Tacoma represented exactly the kind of expansion I had hoped for. Not just geographical growth, but evolution of the model to address different community needs and environmental challenges. If successful, it would demonstrate that our approach could be adapted to contexts far removed from the luxury real estate market where it had originated. The cafe owner, Sophia, stopped by my table with a plate of her signature lavender shortbread. She had become a friend over the past year, her small business having benefited from one of our microloan programs after traditional banks had rejected her expansion plans. "You've got that look," she observed with a knowing smile. "The one that means you're plotting something world-changing." I laughed, accepting the shortbread with gratitude. Not world-changing. Just considering how ideas evolve when different perspectives are applied to them. "Isn't that how all the important changes happen?" Sophia replied. "One person has an insight, another adapts it, and eventually, what seemed radical becomes common sense." Her casual wisdom captured precisely what had been happening with our development model. What had begun as my personal reimagining of real estate's purpose had been enriched by the perspectives of partners like Isabella, implementers like Emma, and now, potentially, adapters like Mark. Each contribution had strengthened and expanded the original vision, allowing it to address needs and circumstances I could never have anticipated alone. As twilight deepened into evening, the cafe's warm lighting created pools of inviting radiance against the gathering darkness outside. I found myself thinking of those early days after my bankruptcy, when the future had seemed equally dark and uncertain. The path from that desperate moment to this peaceful evening had been neither straight nor easy, but each step, even those driven by anger and vengeance, had ultimately led to a place of greater purpose. My phone lit up again, this time with a news alert that caught my attention. Thompson Development files for complete liquidation. The final business remnant of Daniel's empire was dissolving, the last properties being sold to satisfy creditors. The notification included a brief statement from Daniel, his first public comment in over a year. "I am exploring new opportunities outside the Pacific Northwest and wish Seattle's development community continued success." 2 years ago, this news would have represented the culmination of my revenge, the complete erasure of Daniel's professional presence in the city he had once dominated. Now it registered as little more than a footnote, the formalization of a change that had long since become reality. Daniel's approach to development had been rendered obsolete not by my personal vendetta, but by the fundamental shift in what the market and the community demanded from real estate development. I closed the notification without feeling the need to read the full article. Whatever path Daniel pursued next was his own journey, no longer intertwined with mine. My focus had shifted entirely to the expanding possibilities of the development model that had emerged from our conflict, possibilities that now extended far beyond any personal reckoning. Finishing my tea, I left a generous tip for Sophia and stepped out into the crisp Seattle evening. The walk to my apartment took me past one of our early projects, a mixed-use development that combined market-rate housing with affordable units, educational facilities, and community spaces. The lights glowing from windows represented not just residences, but a living ecosystem of interconnected activities and relationships. A small group of residents was gathering in the community garden, preparing for what looked like an evening workshop. I recognized Maria, a retired teacher who had moved into one of the affordable senior units and now coordinated educational programs that connected elderly residents with the children and teenagers in the building. Her work epitomized the kind of organic community building our developments were designed to facilitate. Maria spotted me and waved enthusiastically. "Rebecca, you're just in time. We're teaching the young people how to preserve fall vegetables from the garden. Would you like to join us?" The invitation was genuine and warmly offered. In this space, I wasn't Rebecca Mitchell, the CEO, but simply another community member who might want to learn traditional food preservation techniques alongside the diverse group already assembling. "I'd love to," I replied, realizing I had nothing more important on my evening schedule than this impromptu opportunity to experience the community connections our developments were designed to nurture. For the next 2 hours, I chopped vegetables, packed canning jars, and learned the fine points of pickling from seniors who had carried these traditional skills through decades of modern convenience. The teenagers participating, most from the affordable family units in the building, alternated between eye-rolling at the old-fashioned activities and genuine fascination with the hands-on process of transforming garden produce into preserves that would last through winter. By the end of the evening, we had produced dozens of jars of pickled vegetables, with plans to use them partly for a community dinner the following month and partly to stock a local food bank. As we cleaned up, I found myself working alongside a young woman named Elena, whose quiet efficiency suggested both maturity and practiced self-reliance. "You don't seem like a real estate developer," she observed unexpectedly, carefully wiping down the stainless steel counters. "What does a real estate developer seem like?" I asked, curious about her perception. She considered for a moment, sorting out her thoughts. "I don't know. Not someone who spends an evening pickling vegetables with a bunch of people they don't really need to impress." Her candor made me smile. "Maybe that's why our developments are different. We believe in actually experiencing the community spaces we create, not just designing them from a distance." Elena nodded, seeming to accept this explanation. "My mom says we wouldn't have been able to stay in Seattle if these apartments hadn't been built. The rent everywhere else was getting too high, even with her working 2 jobs." Her simple statement crystallized the real-world impact of our work in a way that financial reports and development metrics never could. Behind the policies and designs were families like Elena's, people whose lives were directly shaped by the decisions made in corporate boardrooms and city planning departments. "That's exactly why we build this way," I told her. "A city needs all kinds of people to thrive, not just those who can afford luxury condos." "Well, it works," she said with the definitive certainty of youth. "I can walk to my school, my mom can take the light rail to both her jobs, and we have this garden where we can grow food instead of just buying everything from the store." As basic as her assessment was, it captured precisely what we had aimed to achieve: developments that facilitated practical, sustainable living for diverse community members rather than isolating people in homogeneous economic enclaves. Walking. Home later that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from the auction room where I had executed my revenge to this quiet neighborhood street where I could witness the tangible benefits of our transformed approach to development. The woman who had changed the locks on Daniel's properties had evolved into someone who unlocked opportunities for communities across the city. The anger that had once fueled my every decision had been transformed into a creative energy that now powered a movement extending far beyond my personal story. My apartment, a comfortable but modest space in one of our first integrated developments, offered panoramic views of the city lights reflecting off Puget Sound. From this vantage point, Seattle appeared as a constellation of interconnected communities rather than a battleground for real estate dominance. I made a cup of herbal tea and settled on my balcony, enjoying the peaceful conclusion to a day that had encompassed both professional milestones and personal connections. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The expansion into Vancouver, Mark's proposal for Tacoma, ongoing negotiations with the City Council over zoning innovations for our next major project. But tonight offered a moment to appreciate how completely the landscape had changed, both literally and figuratively. My phone chimed with a message from Isabella. Just heard about Daniel's liquidation. Turning point or footnote? Her question captured the choice I had faced throughout this journey. Whether to define my path in relation to Daniel's fall or by the independent value of what we were creating. 2 years ago, my answer would have been immediate and definitive. Now it required a moment of honest reflection. Footnote, I replied finally. The story moved on long ago. Isabella's response came quickly. Exactly. See you tomorrow for the Vancouver planning session. Setting aside my phone, I returned. My attention to the city spread out before me. Seattle had been transformed during my lifetime from a provincial outpost to a global hub of innovation and commerce. Yet that transformation had come with costs: skyrocketing housing prices, displaced communities, increasing inequality. Our work represented an attempt to channel the city's continued growth in more equitable and sustainable directions. A knock at my door interrupted these reflections. Opening it, I was surprised to find Emma, tablet in hand despite the late hour. "I'm sorry to disturb you at home," she began, her expression suggesting news that couldn't wait for morning. "But I thought you'd want to see this immediately." She handed me the tablet, already open to an email from the mayor's office. The message was brief but consequential. The City Council had unanimously approved our proposal for a comprehensive redevelopment of the Central District, a historically Black neighborhood that had faced decades of disinvestment followed by recent gentrification pressures. Our plan, developed in close collaboration with longtime residents and community organizations, represented a new approach to urban renewal, one that prioritized preserving cultural heritage, creating economic opportunities for existing residents, and integrating new development with established community institutions. "This is remarkable," I said, scanning the detailed approval document attached to the email. "The council rarely votes unanimously on development projects, especially one of this scale." Emma nodded, allowing herself a rare display of open enthusiasm. The community support made the difference. When the public hearing started with testimony from the African American church leaders, neighborhood associations, and youth organizations, all supporting the same development plan, the council couldn't ignore the consensus. The Central District project would become our most ambitious undertaking yet, a 15-block redevelopment that would include affordable housing, business incubator spaces, educational facilities, and cultural preservation initiatives. More importantly, it would establish a template for equitable urban renewal that could be applied in historically marginalized neighborhoods across the country. We should celebrate this properly, I decided, setting aside the tablet. Not just within the company, but with the community partners who made it possible. Let's host a gathering at the community center this weekend. Nothing formal, just an opportunity to acknowledge what we've accomplished together. Emma made a note, already thinking through the logistics. I'll coordinate with the neighborhood associations first thing tomorrow. They'll know best how to make this meaningful for the community. After she departed, I returned to the balcony, my perspective on the city now infused with fresh appreciation for the possibilities unfolding within its boundaries. The Central District approval represented more than just another business success. It validated our fundamental belief that development could serve as a tool for community empowerment rather than displacement. The night had deepened, most of the city's windows now dark as residents retired for the evening. Yet the urban landscape remained alive with potential. Each neighborhood a unique ecosystem of relationships, histories, and aspirations waiting to be engaged with respect and creativity. 2 years ago, I had stood at the auction with a singular purpose: to reclaim what had been taken from me and punish the man responsible. The woman I had become barely recognized that limited vision, though I honored the determination and intelligence that had carried me through those dark days. The expansion of purpose, from personal vindication to community transformation, hadn't erased the satisfaction of defeating Daniel at his own game. Rather, it had contextualized that victory within a larger journey, one with far more meaningful and enduring rewards than revenge could ever provide. My phone chimed one final time for the evening, a message from Martin that seemed to echo my own reflections. Just reviewed the quarterly impact report. Financial returns impressive, but the community outcomes are the real victory. This was always the path you were meant for. His words touched a deep truth. The skills and qualities that had made me effective in executing my revenge, strategic thinking, attention to detail, unwavering determination, were the same ones now driving our community development initiatives. The difference lay not in my capabilities, but in their application, not in the power I wielded, but in its purpose. As the city lights dimmed and the sound of distant ferry horns drifted up from the water, I allowed myself a moment of genuine contentment. The woman who had once changed the locks on every property Daniel owned had ultimately unlocked something far more valuable, a vision of development that created opportunity rather than exclusivity, connection rather than isolation, sustainability rather than exploitation. The keys I now held opened doors not just to buildings but to possibilities. For individuals seeking affordable homes, for communities reclaiming their neighborhoods, for a city reimagining its future. From the ashes of betrayal had risen not just personal redemption, but a movement with the potential to transform urban development far beyond Seattle's boundaries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The Vancouver expansion, the Tacoma proposal, the Central District implementation. But tonight, in this quiet moment overlooking the city I had helped reshape, I could appreciate the extraordinary journey from victim to victor to visionary. The final triumph hadn't been changing the locks on Daniel's properties, but changing the very paradigm of what property development could achieve. And in that transformation lay a victory more complete and satisfying than revenge could ever provide. The discovery that the most powerful response to destruction is not retaliation but creation. Creation of homes that families like Elena's could afford. Creation of spaces where seniors like Maria could share their wisdom with younger generations. Creation of opportunities for professionals like Mark to redeem their expertise through meaningful work. Creation of communities where people of diverse backgrounds and circumstances could build shared futures. As I prepared for bed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was neither the broken victim who had fled to Vancouver in despair, nor the avenging force who had orchestrated Daniel's downfall in the auction room. She was someone more complex and complete, a leader whose personal journey had opened into a path that others could follow, a visionary whose private pain had become a catalyst for public good. The day he moved his girlfriend in, I had changed the locks to every property he owned. But in doing so, I had ultimately unlocked the door to a future far richer than the past I had lost. Not just for myself, but for the communities whose lives would be shaped by the developments we created and the example we set. In the end, the greatest revenge hadn't been destroying what Daniel built, but creating something better in its place. Something that would endure long after our personal conflict had faded into irrelevance. And in that creation lay a satisfaction deeper and more enduring than vengeance could ever provide. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.